The restaurant hummed with the kind of money that had no conscience. She moved between tables like Grace had a body, curves wrapped in a black uniform, natural hair pinned back, eyes carrying storms she never let fall. He sat at the corner table, silver-templed, 60 years of power carved into his jawline, a man who had never once begged for anything. Then she leaned close to refill his glass, and he whispered for words that stopped the world. Asterisk, I'll make you crave me. Asterisk. Her hand froze. The wine trembled in the bottle. Something ancient and dangerous awakened in the space between them. Not a choice, not a mistake. A beginning. Welcome to Black and Soul TV. Please like, share, and subscribe. Asterisk asterisk. The Han River restaurant sat on the 52nd floor of the Choi Tower, Seoul's most untouchable dining establishment. Reservations were made 6 months in advance. The dress code was enforced with quiet ruthlessness by a man at the door whose only job was to turn people away gracefully. Everything about the place was deliberate, curated, and cold in the way only the very wealthy could afford. Sarah Okafor was not supposed to be here. Not permanently, anyway. She had taken the waitressing job 3 weeks ago after her design firm contract in Lagos fell apart, and her cousin in Seoul offered her a couch and a contact. It was meant to be temporary. A bridge. Something to hold her over while she rebuilt. But temporary had a way of growing teeth. She was 28, tall, with deep brown skin that the kitchen's warm lighting turned into something the other servers always seemed to notice. Her curves were impossible to miss, and she had long stopped trying to minimize them. Not because she was bold, but because she was tired of shrinking herself for spaces that hadn't earned her smallness. She wore her uniform with quiet dignity and her smile like armor. That night, the reservation list included one name that made the floor manager whisper to everyone before service began. Asterisk, Choi Tae-yoon is coming. Nobody speaks to him unless spoken to. Nobody lingers. Nobody stares. Asterisk. Sarah had heard the name before. Everyone in Seoul had. Choi Tae-yoon, 60 years old, founder of the Choi Group, a conglomerate that touched shipbuilding, pharmaceuticals, media, and 3 layers of government policy. A man who had built his empire from factory floors and sheer, merciless will. He'd buried 2 business rivals, 1 marriage, and reportedly a scandal that would have ended any lesser man. He was photographed maybe 4 times a year. Each photo looked like a warning. He arrived at 8:47 p.m. with 2 silent men behind him and no menu request. The manager himself rushed to seat him. Sarah was assigned his section because Young-ah, the senior server, had called in sick and there was no time to rearrange. She approached the table with water and a composure she had to actively construct. He didn't look up immediately. He was reading something on a slim tablet, silver hair catching the overhead light in a way that made him look carved from a different era. His hands were large, still, certain. His jawline was the kind that architects might study. He was 60, yes, but time had done something uncommon to him. Not softened him, sharpened him, like a blade that had simply been used well. Sarah set the water glass down. Good evening. My name is Sarah. I'll be your server tonight. Can I start you with something to drink? He looked up, and the room changed temperature. His eyes were the dark, still kind, not cold, but measuring. He studied her face with the quiet attention of a man who had trained himself to see everything. She felt it, felt the weight of it without being able to explain why. Red wine, he said. The 2009 Chateau Margaux, if you still have it. His Korean was unhurried. She answered in her careful, accented Korean that she'd been studying for 8 months. Of course. I'll check with the sommelier. She turned to leave. That was when it happened. Wait. She stopped. He hadn't moved. His voice was low, pitched only for her. There was something in it. Not command, not cruelty. Something darker and more honest than either. I'll make you crave me. Sarah turned slowly. Her heart had done something involuntary. A hard, single knock against her ribs. She looked at him fully. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't performing. His eyes were direct and completely serious, as if he had simply stated a fact he'd observed in another room and was now delivering the report. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. I'll get your wine, sir. She walked away. Her hands were perfectly steady. Everything else inside her was not. Sarah told herself it meant nothing. Men said things. Rich men said worse things. She had heard propositions before, clumsy and entitled ones, from men who confused money with permission. This was different only in its delivery, and she would not give it more credit than it deserved. She was wrong, of course, but she didn't know that yet. Choi Tae-yoon returned the following evening. He requested her section. The manager relayed this with wide eyes and a tone that suggested she should consider it a divine appointment. She considered it an inconvenience and went to his table with the same careful composure. He ordered the same wine. He ate slowly, read from the same tablet, and spoke to her only when she came to the table. But each time she approached, he watched her with that same absolute, unhurried attention, the kind that didn't undress, didn't assume, but simply witnessed, as if she were something worth the cost of looking at properly. By the third evening, she broke first. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked, setting down his dessert. It was a small breach of protocol. She hadn't planned it. He considered the question without embarrassment. "The food is adequate," he said. "But I come back for the same reason anyone returns anywhere. Something here I haven't finished understanding." "I'm a waitress," she said carefully. "Not a puzzle." "No," he agreed, reaching for his wine. "You're far more interesting than a puzzle. Puzzles have fixed answers." She left before he could see what that did to her face. Could a 60-years-old man, old enough to be her grandfather, possibly love again? Subscribe and stay tuned. A few days later, he left her an envelope at the end of the fifth evening. She found it folded beneath his empty wine glass. Inside was a card, cream, heavy stock, embossed with a small C, and a handwritten line. Asterisk, if you're ever between shifts and would like coffee, I know a place that won't make you feel like furniture. Sarah stared at it in the staff bathroom for 4 minutes. Then she tucked it into her apron and went back to work. She told herself she would throw it away when she got home. She did not throw it away. 1 week later, Sarah said yes to coffee. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because she was lonely in this city and she was honest enough to admit it. Maybe because his card had said, "won't make you feel like furniture," and that specific phrasing had targeted something real in her. Or maybe, and this was the part she wouldn't say aloud, because whatever he had whispered across that table on the first night had lodged itself somewhere she couldn't quite reach. The cafe he chose was small, tucked into a side street in Insadong, decorated with mismatched furniture and walls covered in calligraphy. It looked nothing like a place a man like him should know about. He was already seated when she arrived, wearing a simple dark shirt and reading glasses she hadn't seen before. Without the restaurant's formal lighting and the silent guards, he looked, not smaller, exactly, but more real. She sat across from him. He removed the glasses. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't." "I know." He poured her tea from the pot on the table. She hadn't ordered yet, and she realized he had already asked. He'd paid attention to what she drank during her shifts. Asterisk barley tea. No sugar. Asterisk. She wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at him directly. "I need you to understand something before this goes anywhere." He waited. "I'm not available to be a distraction for a man in your position. I'm not looking for a sponsor or a protector or a story. I'm rebuilding my life, and I can't afford for anything to compromise that." Tae-yoon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Everything you just described, distraction, sponsor, story, I have access to all of those things at a phone call's notice. I don't need to sit in a tea house in Insadong for them." Sarah absorbed that. "Then what do you need?" she asked. He looked at her with those still, dark eyes, and something passed across his face that looked startlingly like honesty. "I'm not entirely sure yet," he said. "But I think it involves you talking to me like you just did. Like I'm a person who can be told the truth." The morning stretched on. They talked for 2 hours. About Lagos and what she had built there and lost. About the design work she missed. About Seoul and its overwhelming perfectionism. He listened with his full attention, not performing interest, but actually there, actually present. When he spoke about himself, it was in careful, measured pieces, the factory in Busan where he had started, the years his company nearly collapsed, the marriage that ended not in explosion but in slow, mutual silence. Sarah left the cafe knowing 3 things she hadn't known when she arrived. He was more complicated than his reputation. He was lonelier than any 60-year-old billionaire should be. And she was in tremendous, serious trouble. 2 weeks later, news traveled in Seoul the way it always did in enclosed worlds, fast, distorted, and with casualties. By the 3rd week of Tae-yoon's visits to the restaurant and their 2 additional cafe meetings, someone had taken a photograph. It was grainy, him seated across from her at a window table, her laughing at something he'd said, but grainy was enough. It appeared on a gossip column's social media page with a caption, Asterisk Choi, Tae-yoon's new acquisition. Asterisk. Sarah saw it on her phone during a break and felt physically cold. The comment section was a disaster. Some were curious. Some were cruel. Many of the cruel ones were specifically cruel about her. Her skin, her body, her nationality, her employment. The word acquisition was the most polite thing written about her role in the narrative. She went back to work. She finished her shift. She did not call him. He showed up the next evening regardless. She greeted him with professional cool and took his order without meeting his eyes. He noticed immediately. She knew he would. When she brought his wine, he touched the back of her hand lightly. Not grabbing. Not demanding. Just stopping. You saw it, he said quietly. Everyone saw it. Sarah, it's fine, she said too quickly. It was not fine. He could see that clearly. His jaw tightened. I'll have it removed. You can't remove the people who believe it. She finally looked at him. I told you I couldn't afford for anything to compromise my life here. That photograph was taken without consent and published maliciously, he said, his voice dropping to something that was very quiet and very final. And the person responsible has already been identified. She stared at him. How did you? I have people whose job is to know things quickly. He held her gaze. You are not an acquisition. You are not a story. And anyone who writes you that way will find that words have consequences. He wasn't performing anger. He was simply, absolutely certain. The way men were certain when they meant every syllable they spoke. Sarah felt something shift behind her sternum. Something she wasn't ready for. I have tables, she said. I know. He released her hand. I'll be here when your shift ends. He was. That evening, they walked along the Han River because she didn't want to sit in any place where cameras could reach them. The city glittered across the water. She had her arms folded against the autumn chill. He walked beside her without touching her, which she appreciated, because she wasn't sure what she would do if he touched her. The publication retracted the caption, he said. The writer has been offered an opportunity to reconsider her career choices. Tae-yoon. She almost laughed. Almost. You can't just. I can and I did. He glanced at her sideways. I am not accustomed to watching someone I care about be publicly humiliated and doing nothing. The word care landed somewhere soft and unprotected. We've had coffee 3 times, she said. I'm aware of how many times we've had coffee, he said drily. I count things. She looked at the river. This is going to get more complicated, isn't it? Almost certainly, he agreed, without apology. The following week. His name was Park Seo-joon. He was 34, handsome in the deliberate way of men who had invested in it, and he had been eating at the restaurant every night for 5 days. He always requested Sarah's section. He always ordered slowly. He always found reasons to extend the conversation. You speak Korean beautifully, he told her on the 4th night, leaning forward in a way that occupied too much of her space. Seriously, you're wasted here. Someone should be paying you to be somewhere, not to serve there. Sarah smiled politely. Thank you for the kind words. Can I get you anything else? Your number? She kept her smile in place. The dessert menu? He laughed. He reached out and touched her wrist, brief, presumptuous, and said, I'll be persistent, you know. I tend to get what I want. Across the restaurant, at the corner table, Choi Tae-yoon had arrived without Sarah noticing. He was watching. His wine glass was full. He did not drink from it. His jaw was a straight, controlled line, and his eyes had gone to a very particular kind of still, the stillness of a man who was making decisions he hadn't yet spoken aloud. The assistant seated with him said something. Tae-yoon responded without moving his gaze from where Park Seo-joon's hand had touched Sarah's wrist. Sarah came to Tae-yoon's table 15 minutes later, slightly flustered. I didn't know you were here. Evidently. His voice was even, controlled, but there was something compressed beneath it. The man in section 3. He touches you like that often. She blinked. How long have you been here? Long enough. He finally picked up his wine glass. He bothers you. I can handle it. I didn't ask if you could handle it. His eyes found hers. I asked if he bothers you. A pause. A little, she admitted. Tae-yoon nodded once. Something resolved in his expression with the quiet finality of a locked door. Park Seo-joon's corporate supplier contract with a Choi Group subsidiary was quietly suspended 48 hours later. The official reason cited was a routine review of vendor qualifications. Park Seo-joon never returned to the restaurant. Sarah didn't find out why for another 2 weeks. When she did, she stood in Tae-yoon's office on the 48th floor of the Choi Tower and stared at him for a long moment. You had him removed, she said. I had a vendor contract reviewed. Tae-yoon, he touched you without permission and made you uncomfortable at your place of work. I find that I have very little patience for men who do that. You can't just, You can't use your power to protect you? He turned from the window to face her fully. Watch me. Can an old man crumble his empire for a girl he loves? An empire he has spent decades to build? Is she worth the risk? Hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. 3 weeks later, the corporate sabotage started quietly, as it always did. An anonymous report surfaced in a financial journal claiming that the Choi Group had doctored environmental compliance records for a factory in Incheon. The evidence was thin, but the timing was surgical. It dropped the week before Taeyoon was scheduled to finalize a 30 billion won merger. 3 board members called emergency sessions. The stock ticked downward. The media machine woke up hungry. Taeyoon knew immediately it wasn't random. He had made a particular kind of enemy 2 years prior. Lee Byung-cheol, a rival chairman whose bid to acquire a smaller firm had been outmaneuvered quietly and devastatingly by Taeyoon's legal team. Lee had smiled at the press conference. Taeyoon had known the smile meant patience, not acceptance. Patience had apparently run out. He handled the crisis with the efficiency of a man who had weathered worse. Legal team deployed, counter-evidence assembled, board reassured. By the end of the week, the report had been publicly discredited and 2 journalists had issued retractions. But Lee Byung-cheol had been watching. And Lee Byung-cheol, it turned out, had also been paying attention to a certain restaurant on the 52nd floor. Sarah didn't know any of this when a car followed her home from her Wednesday evening shift. She noticed it on the second block. A black sedan, no plates visible, keeping exactly 2 car lengths back. She turned twice, unnecessarily. It turned with her. Her chest went tight. She kept walking, kept her phone in her hand, and sent one message. Asterisk, someone is following me. Black car. Insadong area, asterisk. She had sent it to Taeyoon before she'd even consciously decided to. His response came in 40 seconds. Asterisk, stop walking. Enter the nearest lit public building. I'm coming, asterisk. She stepped into a convenience store. The sedan slowed and idled at the curb. Her hands were not as steady as she needed them to be. He arrived in 11 minutes. Not a driver. Him, in dark clothes, no guards, moving through the store's glass door with a controlled urgency that looked nothing like panic and everything like someone who had made a decision before his feet hit the ground. He found her immediately. His eyes did a quick, professional sweep of her, checking, cataloging, confirming she was uninjured, and then he stood between her and the front window without making a performance of it. Are you hurt? No. The car. Still there. He pulled out his phone, made one call, said 4 words in rapid Korean she only partially caught, and the sedan was gone in under 3 minutes. She didn't ask how. She was still managing the adrenaline leaving her body. He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled chairman, not the careful coffee companion, not the quietly possessive man across the restaurant. Something raw, something afraid. He had been afraid for her. I'm okay, she said softer. He exhaled slowly. His hand came up, hesitated, and then settled against the side of her face. Just his palm. Just warmth. She felt it through every layer of composure she had built. I shouldn't have let this touch your life, he said. I'm sorry. What is this? She asked. He told her. All of it. Lee Byung-cheol. The sabotage. The pattern. The warning the car had almost certainly been meant to deliver. She listened without looking away. When he finished, she said, So someone is using me to get to you. They won't get the chance to use you again, he said, and his voice had that absolute, final quality again. The locked door sound. Taeyoon. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, still against her face. You don't get to just decide things like that alone. He looked at her. Then decide with me, he said. That night, she went with him to the penthouse because she wasn't going home alone and she knew it. The space was enormous and deliberately minimal. Walls of glass facing the city, furniture that had been chosen for quality rather than comfort, art she suspected he hadn't personally selected. It looked like a space maintained for a person who spent most of his time somewhere else. Do you actually live here? She asked, looking around. I sleep here, he said. Living is a separate activity. He made her tea. She sat on the window seat and watched the city and tried to understand how her life had arrived at this particular address. He sat across from her with coffee and said nothing for a while, which was something she had learned about him. He was comfortable with silence in a way that suggested it had been his oldest companion. Tell me about the woman who left, she said eventually. He looked at her. You mentioned your marriage ended, she said. You don't have to. Her name was Ji-yeon, he said. We were together for 22 years. She was kind, patient. She deserved someone who came home with something left to give. He studied his coffee cup. I gave everything to the company because I understood the company. It was solvable. It had metrics. A pause. People are harder. You seem to find them easier now, Sarah said. One person, he said, looking up at her. I find one person easier now. The room compressed itself into something very small and very warm. Sarah looked away first. Outside, Seoul burned with 10,000 small lights. I don't know what we're doing, she admitted. Yes, you do, he said quietly. You're just afraid of it. She turned back to him. Aren't you? She asked. A long moment. Terrified, he said. And because it cost him something to say it. She could see it cost him. It meant more than anything easy would have. The following week, Lee Byung-cheol's people escalated. Not another car. Something worse. A meeting arranged under false pretense, a location suggested, and Sarah arriving at what she believed was a legitimate job interview for a design consultancy that had reached out to her portfolio online. She had been quietly rebuilding her freelance work for weeks, and the email had seemed professional. She realized something was wrong when the building floor was wrong, the receptionist's smile was too wide, and the man who entered the conference room was not the creative director listed in the email. He was large. He had 2 men with him. He told her, pleasantly, that she should encourage Choi Tae-yoon to reconsider his current legal position against Lee Byung-cheol's interests. He told her she had influence over Tae-yoon that could be very useful. He told her this in a tone that said the alternative had not yet been spoken aloud, but was present in the room. Sarah looked at the 3 men. She said, very clearly, I want to leave now. They didn't immediately move. She did the only thing available to her. She sent her location to Tae-yoon's number with a single word, now. 23 minutes later. She didn't know what Tae-yoon did in those 23 minutes, and she never asked specifically. What she knew was that the door to the conference room opened and 2 men entered who made the 3 men already present reassess several decisions simultaneously. The large man's pleasant tone disappeared. A phone call was made. She was walked to a car without further conversation. Tae-yoon was outside the building. He had come himself again. She was noticing this pattern, that when she was in danger, he didn't delegate. He came. She got into his car, and he drove for 3 blocks before he pulled over and turned to look at her. His hands on the wheel were the only sign of anything, the knuckles slightly white. Did they touch you? He asked. No. He closed his eyes. Open them. I'm going to end this, he said. Lee Byung-cheol is finished. Not as a threat, as a functioning entity. Tae-yoon. Sarah. His voice broke slightly at the edges. Just slightly. Just enough. You walked into that building because of me. Because someone looked at you and saw leverage against me. Do you understand what that means? What it does to me to know that? She understood. She reached across and put her hand over his on the wheel. Then end it, she said. But come back in one piece. Something moved through his face. Relief, grief, want. And he turned his hand over to hold hers. Just held it. Both of them looking at the road ahead. That evening, Lee Byung-cheol's empire didn't collapse in a single move. It collapsed the way Tae-yoon had always worked, surgical, certain, irreversible. Evidence from the original sabotage had been traced, documented, and submitted to both regulatory bodies and private channels simultaneously. Lee's board turned on him within 72 hours. The merger Tae-yoon had been protecting completed cleanly. By Friday morning, Lee Byung-cheol was answering questions in a room with lawyers and no comfortable chairs. Tae-yoon called Sarah when it was done. It's over, he said. She exhaled a breath she hadn't fully released in a week. Are you home? She asked. Penthouse. Yes. I'm coming. She didn't analyze the decision. She just went. She found him in the kitchen, tie loosened, jacket gone, looking out at the city with a glass of wine he hadn't touched. He looked tired in a way she had never seen on him, not defeated, but spent, like a fire that had burned everything it needed to burn and was settling into warmth. He turned when he heard her. She crossed the kitchen and stopped 2 feet from him. You okay? She asked. Better, he said. Now. The word now, its timing, its directness, did something irreversible to the air between them. She looked at him and saw everything she had been avoiding seeing for 6 weeks, that he was not a complication or a risk or a temporary bridge. He was a man who had whispered an impossible promise across a restaurant table and had then spent every subsequent day quietly, absolutely keeping it. He had made her crave him, not through games or pressure or wealth, through presence, through showing up. through being exactly what he had appeared to be every time. Taeyun, she said. I know, he said softly. I'm terrified, she admitted. I know that too. He set the wine glass down. I told you I was also terrified. I'm still terrified. I'd like to be terrified with you, if that's acceptable. She laughed. It came out a little unsteady. And then he stepped forward, slowly, giving her every opportunity to decide, and his hand came up to her face again. The same gesture as the convenience store. Only this time, she didn't cover his hand with hers to anchor herself. She leaned into it. The city kept burning outside the glass walls. The night kept moving. And somewhere in the warmth of that kitchen, in the quiet after the storm, two people who had been afraid of exactly this chose it anyway. Asterisk what followed was theirs alone, spoken in the language of exhaled breath, closed distance, and two souls finally arriving. The next morning, she woke before him. The penthouse was pale blue with early light. She was wrapped in a blanket on the window seat. She had moved there at some point in the small hours when the city felt too big to sleep through, and she could see him across the room, asleep with a quietness he never wore while awake. She looked at him for a moment. 60 years of storms behind that face, all of them settled in sleep. And then the fear came. It arrived the way it always arrived for her, not loud, but persistent. The voice that reminded her of Lagos and the contract that had fallen apart and the photographs on the gossip column and the men in the conference room and the simple, brutal arithmetic of who she was in this city and who he was. The voice that said, asterisk, you know how this ends. You know which one of you is easier to leave, asterisk. She dressed quietly. She wrote a note, a short one, careful, and left it on the kitchen counter. It said, asterisk, I need to think. Please don't look for me yet, asterisk. She left before he woke up. That afternoon, she went to her cousin's apartment and sat on the small balcony with tea and her own turbulent thoughts. She told herself she was being practical. She told herself she was protecting herself. She told herself a 60-year-old Korean billionaire and a 28-year-old Nigerian designer had no realistic architecture for anything lasting. She was very convincing. She was also, she knew, lying to herself in at least 4 specific ways. Her phone rang at 11 a.m. She didn't answer. At 12:30, she received a text. Asterisk, I'm not looking for you. I'm staying where you asked. But I want you to know I'm still here. And the note didn't say you were leaving. It said you needed to think. I'm giving you that. Take all of it you need. Asterisk. She stared at the text for a long time. At 2 p.m., a delivery arrived. Barley tea, no sugar, from the cafe in Insadong. No note. Just the tea. Just the attention he'd paid 6 weeks ago, restated. At 4 p.m., she called her mother in Lagos. Tell me something honest, Sarah said. Her mother, who had raised her on the dual currency of practicality and love, said, Is he good to you? Terrifyingly so, Sarah admitted. Then what exactly, her mother said. Are you sitting on a balcony by yourself for? That evening, she went back. He opened the penthouse door before she knocked. He had heard the elevator. He stepped aside to let her in without speaking, without the look that said I told you so, without any of the things a smaller man might have used the moment for. He had ordered food. It was on the dining table, still warm. She sat across from him and looked at the man the whole of Seoul feared and thought. He sent me tea and stayed where I asked him to stay and ordered food for my return and didn't say a single word about any of it. I'm afraid, she said. I know. This is not a simple thing. No, he agreed. It's the most complicated thing I've done in 60 years. And you want to do it anyway. He looked at her with those still, dark eyes. I haven't wanted anything this much in decades. Yes, I want to do it anyway. She reached across the table. He took her hand. They ate dinner as the city changed colors below them, and the conversation was quiet and honest and long, and it covered all the terrifying practical ground. His world, her career, the gap in years, the weight of public life, the design work she wanted to rebuild, the office space he mentioned casually that was sitting empty on the 31st floor of Choi Tower, which she immediately told him she was not accepting as a gift. It's an investment, he said. In what? In someone I believe in. She thought about it for 3 days and then accepted it, on conditions she drafted herself. 6 weeks later, the story broke properly on a Tuesday. Not a grainy photo this time. A full profile piece, leaked by someone in Taeyun's inner circle who had clearly been watching with a particular combination of resentment and motivation. It named Sarah. It included her work history, her nationality, details about the office arrangement. It framed everything in the most unflattering possible architecture. Young foreign woman uses connection to powerful CEO. The public response was exactly as divisive as Sarah had feared. She read the comments for 20 minutes and then closed every application and went to work. Not the restaurant. She had transitioned fully to her design consultancy by then, operating out of the 31st floor, but worked nonetheless. She put her headphones in and she designed, because creating things had always been how she survived having things taken from her. Taeyoon arrived at her office at 3 p.m. He walked in without announcement, looked at her screen, set a coffee beside her keyboard, and said, "We're going to a dinner on Friday." She took her headphones off. "What dinner?" "The Choi Group Annual Director's Reception. I'm bringing you as my guest." She stared at him. "Is this your response to the article?" "This is my response to the question of who you are in my life," he said, simply. "I don't want there to be any further ambiguity." "Taking me to a director's reception in front of your entire board?" "Yes." "Will not be a quiet decision." "No," he agreed. "It will not be quiet at all." She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said. "All right," he repeated, as if she'd handed him something significant, which she had. Friday evening. She wore deep burgundy. Her hair was natural and elaborate, and she wore it like a declaration. He met her in the lobby and stopped when he saw her. A real stop, one beat of arrested motion. And whatever he saw on his face in that half second was something she was going to spend considerable time thinking about later. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked into the director's reception together, and the room did what rooms do when something unexpected enters them. It reorganized itself around the new information. Taeyoon introduced her to each board member by name, without apology, without context setting. Asterisk, this is Sarah Okafor. She runs Okafor Design, asterisk period. No explanation of how they knew each other. No softening. Just her name, her work, her presence. By the end of the evening, 3 board members had asked for her professional contact. In the car afterward, she looked at him. "You planned all of that," she said. "Carefully," he admitted. "You made sure they saw me as a professional first." "You are a professional first," he said. "I just ensured the room received accurate information before they could construct their own narrative." She looked out the window at Seoul moving past. "You're a dangerous man," she said. "Only on your behalf," he said. 3 months later, the Okafor Design Consultancy had its first major contract, a redesign of a cultural center in Mapo District. The commission came through a reference. The reference came from a Choi Group board member who had met Sarah at the reception and then seen her portfolio and made a decision based entirely on the quality of her work. She told Taeyoon this over dinner and watched something warm and quiet and proud move across his face. "I didn't help with that," he said. "I know you didn't," she said. "That's why I'm telling you." He reached across and touched her hand. They had settled into something over those 3 months that she hadn't had a word for at first, and now thought of simply as home. Not a place, but a condition. The penthouse had begun to look lived in. She had left things there. A design book, a tea tin, a throw blanket she'd complained was the wrong weight, and that had been replaced within a week by one that was exactly right. He had stopped treating the apartment like a maintenance location and started treating it like somewhere to return to. They argued sometimes about boundaries, about his reflexive protectiveness, about the moments when his power moved before she'd given consent. Those arguments were real and uncomfortable and important, and they had them fully, without shutting down, without either of them walking away. He was learning to ask. She was learning to let him help without it diminishing her. It was the most functional thing she had ever built. One evening, she arrived at the penthouse to find it different. Quiet, warm-lit, and containing Taeyoon standing near the window with something in his hand that she couldn't see from the door. "What's happening?" she said, reading the room. He turned. In his hand was a small box. Dark velvet. He held it the way he held things he was uncertain about, not tentatively, but with more care than usual. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what I want the rest of my life to look like." She stayed very still. "And I find that every version I can construct, every possible arrangement of the years I have left, looks better with you in it. Significantly better. Non-negotiably better." He opened the box. Inside was a ring that was not extravagant in the way of men who used jewelry to perform. It was beautiful in the way of things chosen for a specific person. "I'm 60 years old. I don't have patience for things I'm not certain about. And I am absolutely certain about you." Sarah looked at the ring. Looked at him. looked at this man who had whispered an impossible promise across a restaurant table and had spent every day since making it real. "You told me you'd make me crave you," she said. "I did," he agreed. "You weren't wrong," she admitted. He almost smiled. "Is that a yes?" She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. She took the ring from the box and held it in her own hand for a moment, turning it in the light. "It's a yes," she said. "But I want you to know, I'm not marrying the chairman. I'm not marrying the power or the tower or the name. I'm marrying the man who sent me barley tea when I was sitting on my cousin's balcony being afraid." His jaw moved. "That man," he said, "is very glad to be chosen." He slid the ring onto her finger. She pulled him down, a small movement, her hand at his collar, and the city spread out behind the glass wall, and Seoul burned with 10,000 lights, and somewhere in that penthouse that had finally, fully become a home, two people arrived completely. 12 months after the ring. The wedding was private. 30 people. A Hanok estate in the North Seoul mountains. Early winter, the trees bare and beautiful. She wore cream with a deep neckline and her hair was enormous, and she walked toward him through thin morning snow, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her in the restaurant on the first night. Like she was something he hadn't finished understanding, and like he was grateful there was still more to discover. He cried. Quietly. One single moment, controlled fast, but she saw it. She would keep it like a secret for the rest of her life. They exchanged words they had written themselves. His were spare and certain and devastating. Hers were layered and warm and honest, and made the 30 people in attendance feel like they'd witnessed something true. 5 months later, Sarah sat in the morning light of the penthouse, her home, fully, unambiguously hers, with a doctor's report on the table and her hands folded around a cup of barley tea, no sugar. She wasn't afraid. She was something else entirely. Something that felt like having built the thing you meant to build all along, from the first foundation stone, even when you couldn't see the shape of it yet. She heard his footsteps from the hallway. She looked up when he came into the kitchen, silver-haired and still devastating, 61 years old, and wearing the particular softness she had learned was only ever visible at home. Here, with her. She slid the report across the table. He looked at it. He was still for a long moment. Then he sat down beside her, not across from her, but beside her, the way he had relearned to occupy space when someone else was in it, and he covered her hands with his. When he looked at her, his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Open, astonished. "Whole. Tell me what you need," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "This," she said. "Just exactly this." Outside, Seoul kept moving, vast and electric and indifferent, the way cities always were. Inside, the man who had built an empire out of sheer, merciless will held his wife's hands in a kitchen that smelled like barley tea, and felt, for the first time in 61 years, like every hard thing he had survived had been building towards something worth surviving for. Asterisk, and somewhere across the city, if you listened carefully through the noise of 10 million lives, you could almost hear the echo of a whisper made across a restaurant table nearly 2 years ago. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'll make you crave me. Asterisk. He had not been wrong. If you enjoyed the story, do well to hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more.